I'm so happy to be here. Thank you, Jen, for the introduction. So if any of you are new, I'm Kelly Morrow. I'm a registered dietitian, and I work pretty intensively with people who have Parkinson's disease to help them figure out what to eat, and also to help with managing drug-nutrient interactions, side effects of Parkinson's, and also work really closely with Dr. Lori Mishley, who does research on dietary and lifestyle patterns that are associated with people who are progressing more slowly in their Parkinson's. So my contact information is here on this slide. Today is our fourth class, our fourth and final class. We'll be talking about brain supportive foods, nutrients, and dietary patterns. I think, I wanted to start out with what we've covered so far because all of these classes have been building on the previous class. And so we started out by talking about and defining the PD Pro dietary pattern. And so this is that pattern that was that I introduced. Some of you might already be familiar with it. This is based off of the research that Dr. Lori Mishley has been doing for the past 10 years. PRO stands for patient reported outcomes. So she's been following people over 10 years, looking at what they're eating, how they're living their lives, and then also measuring the different side effects and the symptoms that people are having and quantifying that in terms of progression. So these are the foods here. I always like to start with this with every class. The foods that are associated with slower progression are here in the green, and the foods that are associated with faster progression are here in the yellow or the orange. So we talked about the PD Pro diet pattern. We also, in the first class, talked a bit about protein distribution with levodopa. So if you're struggling with that, you can refer to that first class. We also talked about digestion. Clearly, because this is, a four-part series and these are a lot of topics, we weren't able to go into great detail, but certainly introducing some of the major topics. And then, there are resources that are in each of these slides around further ways to get support. We also talked about preventing weight loss. This is something that happens for a lot of people with Parkinson's. Talked about bone health, ensuring adequate calcium, especially if people are eating fewer dairy products, which is one of those dietary factors that is associated with faster progression. We've talked about phytonutrients and those compounds in plants that are so protective and how those help with inflammation. We also talked about fats and how our brain is mostly fat and the types of fats that we eat are so important. We talked a little bit about sweets. We're going to talk more about carbohydrates today. And along the way, recipes, resources for further learning, for inspiration for cooking, and ideas for how to implement some of these concepts into your diet. So that's just a little bit of an overview. We've covered so many topics, and then today we're going to cover a few more. Again, just thinking about this PD Pro diet, wanting to get more of these foods in the green, minimizing the foods in the red. And I introduced this concept that Dr. Mishley quantified her data into actually points to help people be a little bit more specific about how they're implementing this diet. So the goal is to have negative points at the end of the day or the end of the week. And the more negative you are, the more that's associated with people who are progressing more slowly. And it's not hard to get these negative points. So, every half a cup of vegetables, every 4 ounces of fish, you can really add up your negative points. Some of the ones that give you lots of points are fresh herbs. For every teaspoon, it's -11. So if you have a tablespoon, that's 33 negative points. And that helps to offset some of the positive points up here. So you want to try to minimize these and eat more of these. So that's kind of the overarching theme. And then this is the tool. I introduced this during the first class, but I wanted to kind of bring it back around for this final class, that this is a tool that you can use for free to track your symptoms and to actually have that correlate with a score that you can track over time to see how you are progressing in terms of your symptoms with Parkinson's. So that's something that people will are encouraged to do this frequently, so that if you get more data points and can really see, you know, over 6 months, a year, 2 years, what's your line, what's your slope? Are you decreasing your slope and staying in this good to excellent range? Or are you progressing up into the fair or poor range? So this is a tool that's been validated to help you assess that. So that's a little bit of a review, because we've talked about so many topics, and I want to make sure that the ones that we're talking about today have a foundation in what we've already talked about, and also expand on a couple of the topics. And so one of the ones I want to expand on is blood sugar and how that impacts Parkinson's and brain function. We talked a little bit about that last time in terms of thinking about inflammation, and a little bit about what I call sweets that give back. So ways that you can eat sweets that might be less inflammatory and more supportive for your brain, and even give you some of those negative points at the end of the day. We'll talk about a few nutrient cofactors. So nutrients like vitamins and minerals that actually help our body to reduce inflammation or support the way that our body uses neurotransmitters and all of the kind of biochemistry that happens, and definitely tying that to food. So we're not getting into that system of what I might call nutritionism, where you look at a food and only see it for its component parts, because we want to look at the whole food. But we can recognize that there are certain foods that have special nutrients that are supportive. And then I want to end with looking at some dietary patterns that support brain health. We already looked at a couple of them in the first class. So that's the Mediterranean diet pattern and the MIND diet pattern. I'm going to review that briefly again, but then also we'll talk about fasting and ketogenic diets. These are really hot topics that some people are really interested in knowing more about, whether these types of dietary patterns can be helpful. So we'll end with looking at that. As always, you can put questions in the chat box, and we will, and I'll, you know, periodically look at that and then certainly come back to it at the end of the class. As we launch into the diet, again, wanted to make sure everyone's taking a step back, that there are lots of dietary influences that we'll be looking at that are associated with slower progression of Parkinson's. But we also need to recognize physical activity is so, so important. Social connection, avoiding chemical exposures as much as possible, getting good sleep. These are all essential for brain health as well. And so sometimes when I'm having conversations with people and we're sort of narrowing down and getting to maybe the way somebody is eating one particular food, and they're saying, but I just really, really like that, and I know it's on the list of what causes, you know, what's associated with faster progression, I'll often have people take some steps back and say, all right, let's see what we can add in that has more of those negative points. And remember, the negative points are positive in terms of beneficial. And then also looking at these other factors, right? So if you're eating foods that are on that list, if we go back here, if you're eating foods that are over here, you know, maybe getting more of these points that are in the orange, and you're not getting good sleep, you're not moving your body, you're socially isolated, maybe you have some exposures, that's going to be overall worse than if you have more of these imbalance or more of these lifestyle habits associated with people who are more slowly progressing. So I'm saying that just to keep it in perspective, and also to remind yourself how many different, I call them toggle points, how many different toggle points there are to improve your PD score if you're doing that scoring tool, improve the way you're feeling, and hopefully reduce your slope so that you have fewer symptoms. Let's talk about the foundation for a healthy brain. There are lots of nutrients and lifestyle factors, as we've discussed, but a major one is carbohydrates. And I think that a lot of people are really confused about carbohydrates, what they are. A lot of people think that they're universally not good. And so I want to have a conversation about what they are and how our body uses them. It is important to know that it is the preferred source of fuel for our body and our brain. Um, our body and especially our brain can run off of other fuel sources, but the preferred source is carbohydrate. Proteins are also really important. In the first class, we talked about that, how we need to make sure that you're balancing your protein with your medication. But proteins are a source of those neurotransmitters like dopamine. It's also important for building and repairing body tissues. Essential fats, we talked about that in the last class, in inflammation quite a bit. So I would have you refer to that for more details about ways to get those essential fats, or those fats we have to get through our diet. Our brain is mostly fat, and a big percentage of that is essential fatty acids, or those omega-3s. And so having sources of omega-3 like fish, flax, walnuts, chia seeds, having leafy green vegetables, these are some major sources, seafood being probably the top. Having good fluid and hydration. If you think about your cells, if your cells are dehydrated, that can actually even change the structure of them a little and how they interact with neurotransmitters and things like that. So staying well hydrated is really important for healthy brain. Hydration helps to keep your gut healthy as well. And we know that there's a strong connection between the gut and the brain in terms of the health of the microbiome. And if you're really constipated, that can affect that. So lots of ways that hydration is important for the brain. Lots of nutrients. We'll talk about these in just a little bit more detail and what kind of foods that you find them in. Vitamins and minerals, and then of course those phytochemicals. So this aspect of reducing inflammation. So there's a big tie-in with what we're talking about today to the last class, which was all about inflammation, because we know inflammation can really negatively impact the brain, especially with Parkinson's. Let's talk about carbohydrates, what they are and why they're so important. So they are a source of glucose. So carbohydrates are put together in chains in our body and also in plants. And you can almost think of it like if you've ever built Legos and you have all the little pieces stuck together. So our body will break those apart and will use that to make energy. So it's incredibly important to make sure that you have carbohydrate. If you are not eating enough calories overall, your body will start to break down your own tissues, and your muscles will actually be a source of carbohydrate. Even though your muscles have protein, your body can take off a part of it, the nitrogen part, and then use the rest. Some of those proteins can be used like glucose. So it's essential to have enough calories and a balance of the different types of foods, especially carbohydrate foods, so that you are sparing your muscles, you're feeding your brain, and you have plenty of energy. These are the sources that are in what we would call, these are just the different sources of carbohydrates. So whole grains and starches, legumes and beans, fruits and vegetables. These are really the foundation. But we also get carbohydrates from dairy products and also sugar. So the last two are limited or minimized on that pro diet. There is quite a bit in the medical literature about how people with Parkinson's might have an impaired ability to manage glucose in their body. And that has to do with how you might absorb glucose into your cells, and also that there is a higher risk of Parkinson's among people who have glucose problems managing glucose, like diabetes or prediabetes. And so, up to 46% of adults worldwide have what's called insulin resistance, meaning glucose can't get into the cells and it stays in the blood. And that can create inflammation. So I think for this reason, it's important to consider the types of carbohydrates that you're eating to help reduce that inflammatory process and protect the brain. I wanted to put this in here just to describe a little in case people weren't sure what insulin resistance meant. You might have heard that before. You might have heard what diabetes or prediabetes is. I've seen many people with Parkinson's who have problems with their blood sugar where it's a little bit too high. So essentially, if this orange circle right here is a cell, we have these different receptors on our cells that can interact with a lot of different like phytonutrients and hormones and other components. Remember, our body is a computer that's picking up signals from its environment, right? So one signal that the cells can listen to or get receive information from is called insulin. And insulin is made by our pancreas when we eat food. Our pancreas releases insulin. Insulin sits in a receptor on our cell, and then it tells the glucose channel to open. It's kind of like if you went and knocked on the door and you wanted, somebody's door and you wanted to be let into their house. So insulin is the key that unlocks the glucose channel. When you have insulin resistance, what often happens is insulin will sit in the channel, but the channel will not open. And so then you have glucose building up in the blood, and that can create an inflammatory condition. So knowing what your blood sugar numbers are is really helpful to know how well these glucose channels are working. And probably one of the best ways to do that is to have a test called a hemoglobin A1C. So it's usually an add-on test. And if you've never had it done, I would recommend that you ask to have that done to see where your numbers are. It's a 3-month average. It represents a 3-month average. And what it means is that they're measuring the amount of red blood cells that have sugar molecules attached to them. Because when you have high blood sugar, when the glucose isn't able to get into the cells, and then the red blood cells are in your blood, those sugar molecules are sticky and they will stick to the red blood cells. And the red blood cells live for 3 months. And so when they can see what percentage of your blood cells have those sugar molecules attached, it can give you kind of an average 3-month blood sugar reading. So a normal hemoglobin A1C is below 5.7%. I would say it's even better to be much lower than that, but it's good to know what your number is. And so I would recommend trying to figure that out if you have never had that done. Let's go back to talking about carbohydrates because how much of that glucose how much glucose you have in your blood does depend on your diet. Not only how your cells are managing it, but how much you're putting into your blood. So for example, if you ate if you ate some whole grain, like maybe you had, some oats, that is a whole grain. The glucose molecules, like I said, like the Legos, are sort of in this really complex structure, and it takes a while to break it down. Versus if you ate maybe some, candy or something with a lot of sugar, it's almost like you're just putting a whole bunch of single piece Legos into your stomach that can just break down so quickly, and it just floods the glucose into your blood. And remember, if you have high blood sugar, it can create inflammation. So what we want to do is we want to try to have more of those complex carbohydrates, the ones that takes a long time for your body to break down, because it's slowly putting the glucose into your blood, and that helps keep your inflammation down. And the best way to know if you're getting those complex carbohydrates is to see if it has fiber in it. So fiber and basically does it contain all of its parts? So here we have a grain, And we see that the whole grain has a bran, which is the fiber. It has the endosperm, which is the starch. And then it has the germ, which is where you find fatty acids, like some of those essential fatty acids that are good for the brain, and lots of vitamins and minerals. So this is a complete package. When you eat that, it has this effect of being slowly released. The glucose is slowly released. And it also comes with the nutrients that we're going to talk about in a few minutes that help to process that carbohydrate and make it into energy. It's just beautiful how it comes in this complete package just naturally. But most of the time, grains are refined. Many of them in this country are refined, which means that the bran is removed and then the germ is removed. And so all you have is this endosperm, which is the starch. And that can get broken down pretty quickly because the fiber is missing. And it's also missing the nutrients that are important for processing that starch, and which starch gets broken down into glucose. And so it takes that nutrition from our body, right? If they eat a whole grain that has the magnesium and it has the B vitamins and everything that's necessary to break down that carbohydrate into energy, that is something that is really supportive to our body. But if we have the refined grains that are missing all of that, we have a flood of glucose that goes into the blood quickly, increasing inflammation. And then it depletes our body of nutrients, our own stores of nutrients, in order to make it into energy. So there's lots of reasons why you want to have whole grains and starches that have their fiber. And you could also ask of your food, or your carbohydrates, is it whole or missing any of its parts? These are some examples of foods that have high fiber in them. So you might expect, they've been the foods we've been talking about for the last 3 classes. So fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds, whole grains, legumes, all of these are really rich in fiber. And when you're eating these foods, you're naturally getting that fiber and you're getting those nutrients that are so important for making energy. When you're looking at a label, you want to look under this total carbohydrate, how much fiber is in there. So if you're having, cereal or bread or pasta or like any of those types of foods, if it says 0 or 1 gram of fiber, try to look for something that has, 4 to 6 grams of fiber. 6 is probably high, but if it has at least 4 or 5, that's excellent per serving. You always want to look at the serving too. And we want to aim for about 25 to 40 grams per day of fiber. When you're eating those refined carbohydrates, what ends up happening, and also if you're not eating regularly, you can end up with blood sugar that goes up and down and up and down and up and down. And that's because your body is reacting to the inconsistent amounts that are either flooding in or leaving really quickly versus this kind of green line here, which is the steady stream if you're eating foods that have fiber in them. We want to keep our blood sugar even because that helps with our energy levels. It helps with our brain functioning. It helps reduce inflammation. It's overall better for our body and brain. So this is how you would maintain that kind of green line, that balanced blood sugar. So you need to eat at regular intervals. So avoid skipping meals. Eating carbohydrates with some protein and fat. So a balanced meal. And then choosing high fiber carbohydrates. And I'll bring you back to this plate that I introduced on the first class, that if we eat our plate where we have a quarter of the plate as whole grains and starches, a quarter of the plate as protein, and about a half of the plate as vegetables, that's typically a way that you're going to achieve that, getting that fiber, that balance, and also adding in some fats to make sure that that whole system just kind of slows down so that you're slowly releasing the glucose into your blood. Here are some of those PD Pro carbohydrates that have that really slow effect of slowly raising your blood sugar for that even energy response. So oats, brown rice, barley, corn. We talked about a few of these last time too. Buckwheat, quinoa, purple, red, and yellow potatoes, sorghum, amaranth, wild rice, teff, fonio, eba gari, which is a fermented cassava, winter squashes, sweet potatoes, and yams. There's so many different options that are out there, and trying to get them in their whole and unprocessed form. There are also some foods and spices that can promote insulin sensitivity. So some of the phytochemicals, like we've talked about before, actually help those glucose channels open. So remember, with insulin resistance, the insulin signal kind of knocks on this door of the cell, but then the door doesn't open. That glucose channel doesn't open. And so these foods have phytochemicals in them that help those doors open. Some of them you might be familiar with, like garlic and cinnamon. Cinnamon actually has some pretty good research about how it can help those glucose doors open. Garlic also. Salmon, because of the healthy fats, those essential fatty acids, those omega-3s, help when they're they help to reduce inflammation, and lower inflammation helps to open those glucose channels. So if you were going to think about insulin resistance in terms of like a person in a house that might not want to open their door, if it felt unsafe outside of your house, you probably wouldn't open your door. And that's kind of like what happens with your cells. If there's inflammation happening, those glucose channels just don't open very well. And omega-3s help to lower that inflammation, essentially making it your neighborhood safer so you feel like you can open your door. The garlic and cinnamon have that effect too, but they also, those phytochemicals also send signals to the cells to open those glucose channels. So turmeric, also very anti-inflammatory, really great for the brain. So eating turmeric in curries and such, you can put turmeric like in your eggs or vegetables. I would encourage you to use turmeric in your cooking. And then these are probably, some of you may or may not have heard of them. Bitter melon is often eaten in many Asian countries. In India, they'll make it into stir fries or make it into pickles. And it is very bitter, but it has some components, some phytonutrients in it that help increase insulin production in the liver and also help those glucose doors open. And then fenugreek, many people are familiar with the leaves of fenugreek, which are also beneficial, but the seeds have a lot of soluble fiber, so that's good, but also have some phytonutrients in them that help those glucose channels open. So, and they kind of taste like maple syrup in a way, so it's kind of nice. But you could get fenugreek seeds, and if you like to eat oatmeal, or you could put them, sprinkle them on your salad. You'd need to kind of grind them up. They're a little bit hard, but a lot of times people will use them in baking. You could substitute maybe like 2 or 3 tablespoons in a cup of flour for some fenugreek seed ground up, and that might be helpful for increasing the fiber and giving you more of those phytonutrients that help you to use glucose a little bit better. So these are just a few options. And then also some mushrooms too. So reishi mushrooms, there's other types of mushrooms that have been found helpful. I like to have reishi mushroom tea. That's probably one of the easiest ways to get reishi mushroom, and I think it tastes good. There's a company called Traditional Medicinals that makes a nice reishi tea. So these are just a few options. So a couple of ideas here for the pro diet, meals. So we have, daytime, maybe a little less protein. We see all of the salad greens and the garbanzo beans and the sweet potato. These are all sources of carbohydrate that are really high fiber. We might have some whole grain crackers and avocados. So these are all high in fiber. And very what we would call slow carbohydrates. And then the evening, maybe we would have, maybe some corn tortillas, avocado again, black beans, which are really high in fiber as well, and some salad greens, which are also high in fiber. So we've got a balance of protein, fat, and fiber in all of these meals. And that's what helps to keep your blood sugar kind of in an even line. Here's one of my favorite recipes. It's a quick lemon and garlic quinoa salad, and for every serving, it's negative 45 points, which is pretty awesome. It's very easy to make and has very few ingredients. It has such incredible flavor. I often put even a little extra lemon, but I've also put some garbanzo beans in here. You could have it with a piece of fish. Sometimes I'll put some greens in this recipe, and it comes together so quickly. The dressing is just garlic, lemon juice, olive oil, and salt. You can also use uh, tamari if you wanted, or soy sauce, but this is a really easy dressing. And then basically you just cook the quinoa, you grate the carrots, you chop up some parsley, you put in some sunflower seeds. It's delicious, and it keeps for several days in the fridge. Let's talk about some of the brain specific nutrients. And, like I said before, I don't want to get too much into this idea of nutritionism, because it is important to think about the whole food versus just really reducing all foods to like what are the nutrients that are in there. Um, However, there are some nutrients that are very, very important for brain health. And for the most part, if you are eating whole grains and starches, they are one of the best sources of all of these B vitamins that we're going to be talking about here. Um, they are really important. These B vitamins are really important for making energy in our cells. And so our brain is about 2% of our body mass, but uses 20% of the energy. So we need to make sure that we've got plenty of energy for our brain function, and carbohydrates, especially the ones that are high fiber, are going to be really helpful. So you can see some of the different sources here, and they're all of the things that we've been talking about. And many of, I would say, focus on the ones that are PD Pro. So for, some of these, we've got eggs, we've got lots of different vegetables and greens, whole grains, fish, nuts and seeds. You're just going to see, and beans, legumes are such a great source. Beans and legumes, fruits and vegetables, fish, nuts and seeds. I mean, you can kind of see a pattern here, right? If you're eating nuts and seeds, beans and legumes, fresh fruits and vegetables, you're going to be getting these nutrients very easily. And you don't have to have all of the animal source proteins. Having some eggs and fish is definitely still in that PD Pro realm, but you can certainly get them from plant sources. Magnesium is a mineral that's also really important. It's important for its anti-inflammatory aspects. It actually calms down some of these mechanisms in our brain that can increase inflammation. It is neuroprotective for that reason. It's also a muscle relaxant. So if somebody is, if you're having like stiffness, it can, if you have magnesium, that can be helpful. It can also be helpful for constipation. It helps to reduce anxiety. It helps to promote sleep. So there are studies that show how it can help with reducing alpha-synuclein because of that anti-inflammatory process. So according to some of the dietary studies that are done by our government, 40% of the US population does not meet estimated daily requirement of magnesium. So this is something that we talk about a lot in our clinic. How do you get magnesium? We don't need tons of magnesium, but we need enough to help support our body and brain. So nuts and seeds, leafy greens, whole grains, legumes. Do you see a pattern here? If you're eating these foods, not only are you getting all those B vitamins, but you're also getting your magnesium as well. And then there's also, a lot of people are excited about the dark chocolate, which is actually an awesome source of magnesium. So here's an example of ways you can get magnesium really easy. Remember, you need between 300 to 400 milligrams per day. If you have 2 tablespoons of hemp seeds every day, you're already over half of the way there. So very easy if you're eating these whole foods like nuts and seeds, legumes, some dark chocolate is good, whole grains, greens, you're going to get your magnesium very, very easily. So add leafy greens wherever you can, sprinkle nuts and seeds on your foods or have a snack, choose whole grains, have legumes at least once a day, like bean soup, hummus or bean dip, add a little bit of beans to your salad or pasta, and maybe have some dark chocolate for a sweet treat. These are some trace minerals. So we talk to people about like selenium, zinc. So selenium is really important for the production of glutathione, which is kind of like our, some people call it our master antioxidant, or that it is very much prominent in our body, and it helps to protect our brain. And so there is one food that has an incredibly high amount of selenium, and you can actually run into problems if you have too much. But Brazil nuts are very, very high in selenium. So I would say just have, a couple, two tablespoons is probably a couple of Brazil nuts a day, and 1 or 2 a day is plenty. But you can also see, sunflower seeds, chia seeds, lots of different nuts and seeds, whole grains. Again, same kind of foods are going to be giving you that selenium. And we can see fish is very, very high. So we need at least 55 micrograms a day. And then zinc is really important to help protect neurons. It helps actually the synapses receive the dopamine a little bit better. So zinc is really important for that. And we don't need massive amounts of zinc. But again, these are all those foods that are going to give you that zinc. Here's an example of some garlic herb roasted nuts. So about a quarter cup of nuts is about 7 grams of protein, which is appropriate for most people during the day. And it's also going to give you negative points for your nuts and seeds, and also for the herbs and spices that you might include. Okay, let's wrap up with a couple of dietary patterns here. So as we talked about first class, both Mediterranean and the Mind diet patterns are very supportive. And also this PD Pro diet is very supportive. So I want to just start out there because a lot of people are interested in following more restrictive dietary patterns like ketogenic diets and doing fasting, which we're going to talk about those in a moment. But I want you all to know you don't have to do something really restrictive to get really amazing results in terms of how you feel. And we see many people who are in the PD Pro study, who are participating in that study, where they are progressing more slowly based off of how they're eating and how they're living, and they're not doing something really restrictive. Some people are, but the majority of people are eating more of a like Mediterranean or Mind diet. So again, Mediterranean, mostly plant-based, some seafood, minimizing some of the animal proteins and sweets. And then the Mind diet is very similar to the Mediterranean, but it is adding more leafy greens. So instead of being more general around the vegetables, emphasizing leafy greens, and then also more berries. So if you want to follow these types of patterns, or if you're looking for resources, recipes around the Mediterranean Mind diet, those are a really good place to start. Let's talk about intermittent fasting. There's a lot of different ways to do this, which I'll highlight in a moment. But there's more research on intermittent fasting and different types of fasting for brain health and a lot of other health conditions, whether it's immune, metabolic, looking at issues around, well, the research around weight isn't quite as good in terms of people trying to lose weight. But inflammatory conditions, autoimmune conditions, I mean, there's a lot of research and interest in modifying the way that you're eating in terms of the timing of your food. So if we're looking at Parkinson's disease and intermittent fasting, some of the pros, I'll say there's a lot more animal research than human research. In animal research, because animals have a short lifespan and they're able to really see what happens, they find that fasting animals helps to preserve neuron health and prevents them from dying. The nerves, like especially dopaminergic nerves, helps to prevent motor and cognitive decline, improve survival of the neurons, and they can show a decrease in the alpha-synuclein in the brain of animals that are fasted. In humans, some of the things that are found, reducing inflammation, for Parkinson's, improving motor coordination, improving insulin sensitivity. So remember, we talked about that in the beginning, that blood sugar, there are some blood sugar balance issues in many people with Parkinson's. So fasting can help with that. It also can support beneficial changes in the microbiome. So we talked a bit about how plant-based diets support the balance of bacteria in the gut, and that there are some changes that can happen with Parkinson's disease, and that can also translate into inflammation in the brain. So fasting can help reduce some of the inflammation in the gut and have a healthier microbiome. So there's definitely some benefits. The cons, or things that we want to be careful about, would be that for many people who are already struggling, so if you are having trouble maintaining your weight, fasting can make that even harder. You can end up, many people lose weight when they do fasting diets. It can trigger disordered eating or maybe compensatory overeating. So if you have a history of an eating disorder, or if you're already struggling to figure out what to eat and feel nervous around food, or have a strong reaction to not eating regularly, this could be problematic and really exacerbate that. And then also can cause unstable blood sugar. So remember, one of the things we talked about was eating regularly is really important to have steady blood sugar. So some people can have a problem with this if they're not regulating their blood sugar really well. So we do have to look at this individually in terms of whether it's right for you. And there's no long-term studies in humans. So we don't really know, with respect, especially to Parkinson's, what the long-term effects are. So what are the different ways that people are doing this? There are a bunch of different iterations. So probably the most common is what we would call time-restricted eating. And that's where you would eat maybe within an 8 to 12-hour window. So a lot of times what people do is they just extend their overnight fast, or they make sure that they're fasting for at least like 12 to 14 hours. So if you stop eating your dinner at like 6 o'clock, maybe you don't eat again until 8 o'clock the next morning or something like that. So for many people, that's doable. But if you're having trouble maintaining your weight, you might need to eat another snack in the evening. So it just is dependent on you individually whether this is the right choice. Some people also do fasting by another way that has been studied is to fast for 2 days a week, and usually have less than 500 calories a day on those 2 days. So maybe like on Tuesday and Friday, you only eat 500 calories. That's another way. Not as common, but that's another way. There's also one that has been the source of a number of studies, and only animal studies for Parkinson's, but it's a 5-day fasting mimicking diet. And Walter Longo is a longevity researcher at UCLA in California, and he has been studying the impact of fasting for most of his career. And he actually turned his research into a program, which is called Prolong. And so we have many people who've done this program, and essentially it's a type of fasting where you do this maybe once every 3 or 4 months for 5 days. And it involves what's called fasting mimicking, which means you're still eating, but you're eating a specific ratio of foods that helps to keep you in a fasted state. So still evolving in the research around this. I would say for many people, it can be safely done, especially if you're just extending your overnight fast or fasting for at least 12 hours. That can still have a positive effect. I do think it's important to consult your healthcare team, your doctors, dietitians, anyone that is monitoring your care like that, to make sure that it's the right choice for you. I do think that the fasting protocols, especially if you're doing, the extended overnight fast, is safer than the ketogenic diet for most people. So ketogenic diets are very low carbohydrates diets. So typically about 15 to 20 grams of carbohydrate in a day is what has been kind of more of a classic ketogenic diet. There are different ratios of carbohydrates that people might eat on a ketogenic diet. And sometimes people need to be more strict, and then they can eat a little bit more once they establish that they're in ketosis. But it tends to be a very restrictive diet. And what the research shows is most people are not able to follow it long term. And we don't have any long-term studies. And there have only been 4 human studies with Parkinson's and a ketogenic diet, with only 153 people total. And one of the studies was only like for one meal, and we're looking at exercise tolerance. One of the studies was looking at feasibility, and then 2 of the other ones were looking at symptoms. But one of the things that they found in humans that didn't show up in animals was that some of the motor symptoms seemed to be worse. So people had more tremor and stiffness on a ketogenic diet. Maybe the non-motor symptoms were better. So some of the cognitive effects and anxiety and depression, those types of things were perhaps improved in some of the studies. But I have worked with people who are trying to do ketogenic diets, and it's often very challenging. I know that there are people who are very motivated to give it a try. I would definitely not recommend it unless you're working with a healthcare team, because there are a number of issues that can come about. For instance, most studies show that it's very hard for people to follow long term. And it can, I've seen it increase the risk of cardiovascular disease, constipation, food cravings, disordered eating, and also nutritional deficiencies. Because if you look at the ratios, it's usually about 75, maybe even 80% fat, about 15 to 20% protein, and typically about 5% carbohydrates would be kind of like the classical way to do it. So it's not, you're not able to really eat in kind of like a normal way, like in terms of social interactions and things like that. So because it could potentially increase motor symptoms and tremor, I would say to be really careful about this. If you want to give it a try, I would definitely communicate with your healthcare team just to make sure that it's the right choice. More research needs to be done. I always like to stay open-minded about this, but at this time, I wouldn't recommend a ketogenic diet. But in some people, maybe doing certain types of fasting might be helpful. So for putting this all together, I do think it's important to think about dietary patterns versus nutrients. We did sort of take a dive into the specific nutrients, and we've talked about some way, like reductionistic ways of thinking about food and phytonutrients and the fats and that kind of thing. But we really want to think about the whole dietary pattern, because that's what really makes a difference. I remember when I was first starting my graduate program, one of my professors came into the class and he handed us all a piece of sheet music. I don't remember which one it was, but he handed us the sheet music and he said, "Tell me your experience of this music." And we all looked at it, and most of us weren't musicians. And so we're like, "I got nothing. I don't know." It looks like music. And then he played the music and he said, "Tell me your experience of this music." And that musical experience is what the dietary pattern, what eating the whole foods are to your body. It's that synergistic effect of all of that together. Some of the things we don't even know about. So if we're just trying to like take different parts of foods out, or re-engineering them, or trying to isolate one specific thing, it typically doesn't lead to greater health. It's really the dietary patterns that are the most important. Yes, some people do need to have some supplementation. However, supplements usually work best with the foundation of a whole foods-based diet. So both are important, paying attention to nutrients, but I would put more emphasis in dietary patterns. The Mediterranean Mind PD Pro, excellent evidence that those types of diets are protective and preventive for Parkinson's. And you don't necessarily need to do something really restrictive. Although if you wanted to try doing some fasting, I would communicate with your healthcare provider and maybe just start with the overnight fast, maybe extending it just a little bit. So keep the big picture in mind again, take some steps back and think about all of those things that help with supporting brain health with Parkinson's, so the dietary and the lifestyle factors. And then just seek help if you're struggling to change your diet or you're not sure what would be the best option for you individually. I wanted to remind everybody about Parkinson's School. So this is Dr. Mishley's school. There are probably 200 classes on this website from all different angles and topics around Parkinson's disease. And I also teach a monthly class there. And my contact information is on the first slide as well if you have individual questions. But it's been such a pleasure working with you all, and I hope that this information has been helpful. So I'm going to just look at the comments and questions now. So we have one question about avoiding weight loss. And that is a bit of a like a bit of a big topic. But I think that one of the things that's important to remember is with Parkinson's, when you have dystonia, when you have tremor, um, when you have dyskinesias, that all burns extra calories. And so typically, especially if people are progressing, you need to have more calories, and weight loss is common. And so eating frequently, maximizing what you're taking in. Sometimes people have a little extra fat in their diet because that often doesn't interfere with the Parkinson's meds as much. Um, and sometimes we do liquid calories and smoothies or bars or things, just ways that you can get calories in that are not going to be interfering with the medications. So I would say avoid skipping meals and trying to get in those foods that maybe have a little bit more fat or liquid calories that aren't going to they'll digest really easily for you. Another question about homemade bread versus commercially made bread. So I love my homemade bread. It's a big part of my diet. When we're looking at the foods that are associated, I'm going to just skip here to bring this back up to the beginning. So bread is up here, and in the there's a little less confidence that in Lori's research, the foods that are here are associated, but the confidence level is less, meaning that I'm not sure the strength of the association. Like there is an association, but doesn't seem to be as strong as down here in this really dark orange box. So I feel a little bit neutral about bread. I don't recommend like, oh, eat more bread. But I think if you're making your own bread and it's whole grain bread, or it's bread that you infuse your love and good intentions into, how can that be bad? You want to also look at your whole dietary pattern too. And I think if you're eating bread that has fiber and it has all of its parts and its nutrients, that's going to be the best case scenario. So I would say thumbs up to your bread. And I would say if bread is the only carbohydrate you're eating, then take a look at some of the others and think of it as an additive first before you think about taking something out. Like, oh, can I try maybe I'll try making, my bread with some mixture of flours, or maybe I'll try having, red lentil pasta, or maybe I'll try having, quinoa, or just mixing it up. So hopefully that's helpful. Let's see, spell the name of seeds. Harriet, can you tell me a little bit more what you're referring to there? Like hemp seeds or chia? I do have, so if you look, maybe if you go back, when you get the slides, just go back and take a look at some of the slides and you'll see them spelled out, the different nuts and seeds, like sunflower seeds, hemp seeds, pumpkin seeds, chia seeds, like all of those types of seeds. And how important is copper? What foods contain copper? Copper is actually important. And one of the things I didn't say about minerals is a lot of minerals have kind of like, in terms of their health benefit, have like a U-shaped curve. So, or like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. So you want to have the right amount. If you don't have enough, that's problematic. And you have too much, that's problematic. So copper is an essential nutrient. Like too much copper can cause inflammation and such, but copper is essential for making collagen, which is part of our protein structure in our body. It's also really important for red blood cell production. It's also really important for making certain antioxidants in our body. So we make some antioxidant compounds in our body, and we use minerals like selenium and manganese and copper and things like that to do that. So mainly you're going to find copper in a lot of the same foods that I've been talking about: nuts and seeds, whole grains, legumes, leafy greens. Like these are all going to be sources of copper. You also get copper from piping in your house, like depending on how the pipes are put together and how old your house is. So, that is sometimes a circumstance where people might get too much copper. But I would probably have to double check like which foods are the highest in copper. It's not one that I'm often talking to people about. It's not often that people are deficient, but I'm not sure if you are referring to getting too much. Um, so shellfish, whole grains, beans, nuts. It's always the same foods. Really, if you eat those whole plant-based foods, you'll get what you need. But yeah, shellfish is pretty high. Oysters, whole grains, beans, nuts, potatoes are high. Um, so is coconut oil always a solid oil? It looks like lard to me. Is avocado oil okay? Um, Most of the time, coconut oil is hard, except if it's summer or you live in a hot environment. So it will be more liquid. I know my coconut oil in the summer, even in Seattle, is kind of liquidy. Um, it does have saturated fat in it. And so I think it's important if you have high cholesterol levels to be careful about how much coconut oil you have. However, coconut oil is on that PD Pro list, and I think it's because it does have some antioxidant and beneficial properties. So I would just think of using a mixture of oils, especially olive oil as well. Um, I don't remember. And then avocado oil is great. It's very similar to olive oil. It has those kind of slippery monounsaturated fats and anti-inflammatory. I don't remember where you mentioned the type of seed, but I think it was when you were talking about glucose. Um, oh, was it fenugreek seeds? Maybe it was the fenugreek seeds, Harriet. So fenugreek seeds, you can find those in a lot of herb stores, health food stores. You might have to order them online, but it might be fenugreek, which is the same as the herb. A lot of people might get the fenugreek leaves, which also have some of those beneficial properties, but the seeds have more fiber and have more for help that are helpful for glucose control. It must be fenugreek. So it's spelled, let me just show you again here, right here, fenugreek. Fennel is actually really good. It's called a carminative. So Harriet just wrote down fennel. Fennel is in the onion family, but and it's got kind of a licorice flavor, and it is a what's called a carminative. So it can actually help with gas and bloating. It's kind of nice. All right, I think we got to the end of the questions. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for having me. It's been an honor, and you know how to reach me if you have questions. And I invite you to come to PD school if you're interested in more nutrition classes as well.
Thank you, Kelly, very, very much. Another super informative class. And thank you to those of you who put in the chat your appreciation of this series. One person said this has been the best class ever. I love hearing that.
Oh.
And speaking of feedback, we really want your feedback. So when I send the email with the video link and the link to the slides, there is going to be a little link in there for a survey. Please, please, please take a few moments. It's not that long to take the survey and give feedback to me and Kelly about how this experience was for you, because this is the first time we've done this. So we're throwing spaghetti on the wall and seeing what sticks. So tell us the good, the bad, the ugly, please, because it really does make a difference. So our next series is going to be that hands-on caregiving that starts March 6th. Registration for that is open. The next one is going to be in the middle of May, called Finessing Fine Motor Skills. Registration for that will open in April. And next week is our big APDA National Virtual Conference. And it is 2 days, not all day, of different classes and activities. So there's laughter yoga, there is a workshop on nutrition, there's all sorts of stuff. So I will put a link to that in the email that I send as well. You can come and go for that, and they're going to record those sessions, but they've really put together a very nice agenda for that. So think about joining us on Valentine's Day and the day after. So lastly, if you are in a financial position to do so and would like us to continue doing programs like this, we welcome any sort of donations because it really does continue us to do this work and bring you these programs. So that's the last thing I have. And I'll put a link to that in your post-event email as well. So I want to thank everybody for participating in this. I want to thank you, Kelly, very much for your time and energy you put into this. I see potential for doing this again next year because it's always good to hear these things. So we'll talk more about that. But I really, really appreciate you and all the time. I love the analogies that you used. You break down very kind of complex information into very digestible parts. So I really found that very, very valuable in the work that I do. So I hope that the audience felt the same way. So thank you. I appreciate it very much. And I hope that you all have a wonderful weekend. And we hope to see you again on another program. And enjoy your day, enjoy your Friday. And thank you so much. Any last words, Kelly?
Thank you all, and thank you for the kind words. Hoping that this is a resource that is helpful for people moving forward, and they know where to find me if they need additional support.
Excellent. Wonderful. Okay. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
You're
Bye.
welcome.